This Sunday, April 9th, 2017, will mark a major milestone in Canadian history, as well as my failure to uphold a very personal goal. And this is that story. In 2007, 10 years ago this week, I traveled with a group of my high school friends to England, Belgium, France, and Germany on one of the most impactful journeys of my life. We were a part of the Birth of a Nation tour for the 90th anniversary of the Battle of Vimy Ridge, comprised of 3,600 Canadian students, one for every Canadian soldier lost in the battle. As a note, I represented Clifford Lloyd Pask of Brockville, Ontario, and did so with an immense deal of pride. I made a promise to myself on that trip, one that I have failed to keep, in that I would return for the 100th anniversary to pay my respects once again and take note of the cultural significance of Vimy Ridge. This video will have to suffice as that tribute. To simplify why Vimy Ridge is so significant in Canadian history, it could be said that this was the first time that Canadians would accomplish the impossible. Vimy Ridge was a prominent terrain feature in France, rising 200 feet above the plains to its east and running a length of around 7 kilometers, which gave any force in command of the ridge an unobstructed view of the battlefield for tens of kilometers in any direction. Having been there, and having seen just how vast the plains around the tribute are, I can only say that it must have been such a dominant position from which to observe the war, and one that would have been positively hellish to try and wrestle from German control. Its geography made it a crucial strong point for the German army, and one that the British and French, both individually and as coalition forces, had repeatedly failed to take from the Germans. Many believed that taking Vimy Ridge was an impossible task, and Canadians would prove them all wrong. But why is Vimy Ridge such an important part of Canadian history? Vimy Ridge signified a series of vital firsts both in Canadian and world military history. It marked the first time that all four Canadian divisions had fought together under a Canadian commander, Sir Arthur Currie. It marked the first time that comprehensive topographical maps, over 40,000 of them, were distributed down through the ranks to ensure that even the lowliest soldier, every single private, could navigate the field during the chaos of combat, and it saw a near flawless employment of the high risk artillery tactic known as the creeping barrage. For those of you unfamiliar, a creeping barrage is where artillery is timed in advance to fall just ahead of advancing infantry. This gives them a great deal of cover as it rolls over the enemy trenches directly before the advancing infantry are amongst them. It's also extremely dangerous because if the infantry advances too quickly for the time frame, or if the artillery does not adjust its fire correctly, the advancing infantry will essentially walk into their own artillery fire. Now, it also saw the use of a Canadian system developed by the then 29-year-old McGill University engineering graduate, Lieutenant Colonel Andrew L. McNaughton, known as sound ranging, which employed a series of microphones placed in no man's land to, within 5 minutes, determine the position accurate to within 28 yards, and even the caliber of enemy artillery pieces. Now, many think of the First World War as the war of the machine gun, but in fact, it was the side that could better utilize their artillery that won the day, and McNaughton's sound ranging technique enabled the Canadians to direct crippling, counter battery fire onto the German guns, largely neutralizing them as a threat to advancing infantry. In short, the Canadian victory at Vimy Ridge was nothing short of remarkable, and would act as a rallying point, a single national symbol that Canadians could look to and say, we, as a nation, as Canadians, triumphed over the impossible. In fact, this was said. A French soldier, hearing that the ridge had been captured, was reported to have said in disbelief, C'est impossible, or That's impossible. I apologize for my horrible French. However, when informed that it had been the Canadians, a force revered for being doggedly determined and absolutely vicious on the battlefield, he replied, Ah, les Canadiens. Ça c'est possible. Ah, Canadians. It is possible. As I reflect upon the events of Vimy Ridge, the respect that victory had earned the Canadian military, and that victory's cost, I can't help but be inspired by the individual courage required by every soldier to have made the impossible possible. I look at Vimy Ridge in what I imagine is much the same way as how I see American sentiment regarding the Battle of Iwo Jima or the Battle of the Bulge. Canadian forces were tasked with an objective so daunting as to be considered impossible, and yet we pushed through. We succeeded. Now, not all of Canada's Vimy history is particularly proud. One quote from a captured German soldier in a book written from a compilation of military documents, soldiers' letters, and diaries, and other materials from the Battle of Vimy Ridge said, The British fight for honor, the Canadians for souvenirs. This quote came from the practice that many Canadian soldiers engaged in at Vimy of taking watches and other such trinkets off of German soldiers captured by the mopping up forces who followed the main advance to eliminate pockets of resistance that were left behind while the primary force pressed the attack. I can't find the book, though I'm sure it's around here somewhere in storage, but I've always remembered that quote from it because of how much it stung. How much it hurt to think of the Canadian victory at Vimy Ridge being tarnished, even somewhat, by soldiers acting so petty and selfishly. It doesn't negate the fact that, by and large, Canadians were revered and respected as soldiers, but it's still quite the sore spot. To wrap this all up, though, I'd like to recite an excerpt from a poem composed by Robert Lawrence Binion, wherein he reflected upon the lives being lost in what was then the opening weeks of the First World War, and that I find to be particularly meaningful while I likewise reflect upon those lost in the Great War. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.